That was the day Marcus learned patience had its limits. The soft hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above him as he sat in the bank lobby, glancing at the clock on the wall. It had been over 2 hours. 2 hours of watching people walk in, get helped, and leave while he sat in the same spot, waiting. The chair beneath him had grown uncomfortable, but he refused to shift too much. He did not want to give the bank manager, the woman who kept glancing at him with that tight-lipped smile, any excuse to say he was causing trouble. Marcus was a man of principle. He had worked hard for everything he had. He wore a tailored suit, his shoes polished to perfection, and his portfolio held years of dedication and smart investments. He was not just any customer walking into this bank. He was here for an important meeting, a meeting he had scheduled well in advance, a meeting that for some reason had been pushed back over and over again. The bank manager, Susan Whitmore, had been pleasant at first, that overly sweet, polite tone laced with something he could not quite put his finger on. She had assured him it would not be much longer. Just a few more minutes, she had said over an hour ago. Yet every time he inquired, she gave another excuse. Meanwhile, he had seen at least a dozen other customers, none of whom looked like him, walk in, be greeted warmly and assisted without delay. Marcus clenched his jaw, keeping his frustration in check. He was no stranger to situations like this. He had faced them before, in boardrooms, in business deals, in places where his accomplishments should have spoken louder than his appearance. But this time, it was blatant. The security guard near the entrance kept throwing glances his way, as if waiting for him to get impatient, to raise his voice, to give them a reason. But Marcus refused to do that. He had learned long ago that control was power. He would wait. Until he would not. As he was about to stand up and demand answers, the doors to the bank swung open, and a group of sharply dressed men and women walked in. Their presence was commanding, their steps purposeful. The air shifted immediately. The teller straightened up, Susan's expression faltered, and the security guard quickly looked away. Marcus did not need an introduction to know who they were. The board members, the people Susan had likely never expected to walk in at this very moment. And the moment Susan locked eyes with the man she had made wait for 2 hours, her entire face changed. Susan's face drained of color the moment she saw them. Her carefully crafted mask of polite indifference cracked as her eyes darted from the board members to Marcus, and then back again. The change was subtle, but Marcus caught it, that flicker of realization, that split second where she knew she had made a mistake, a big one. The group moved with quiet authority, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floors as they approached. They were all dressed in sharp suits, their presence radiating a level of influence that could not be ignored. The man at the front, a tall, older gentleman with silver hair and a measured gaze, took the lead. His eyes scanned the room, pausing for only a second before settling on Marcus. Marcus remained seated, his back straight, his expression unreadable. He could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the hushed conversations at the teller counters, the nervous glances from the bank staff. Even the security guard, who had been watching Marcus so closely before, now suddenly found something else to focus on. Susan recovered quickly, forcing a stiff smile as she stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell," she greeted, her voice higher than before, almost breathless. "We weren't expecting you today." The older man, Mr. Caldwell, gave her a slow nod, but did not return the smile. His gaze flickered to Marcus before looking back at Susan. "That much is clear," he said evenly. "I assume everything is in order?" Susan hesitated for only a second, but it was long enough. Marcus saw it. Caldwell saw it. And so did the others standing behind him. "Of course," Susan said quickly. "I was just about to bring Mr. Carter into the conference room." Marcus could have laughed at the sudden shift in her tone. Just minutes ago, she had barely concealed her impatience when he had asked how much longer he would have to wait. Now, she was acting as though she had been on the verge of rolling out the red carpet. Caldwell turned his full attention to Marcus, offering his hand. "Marcus, it's good to see you," he said. His grip was firm, steady. the kind of handshake exchanged between men who understood the weight of their work. Marcus stood, matching the firm handshake with his own. "Likewise, Mr. Caldwell." His voice was calm, measured, but he did not miss the way Susan's eyes flicked between them, her forced smile faltering at the edges. "Shall we?" Caldwell gestured toward the hallway leading to the bank's conference rooms. Marcus nodded, but before moving, he turned to Susan. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The look in his eyes said enough. And from the way Susan swallowed hard, she knew it too. As they walked, the other board members fell into step. Behind them, the tension in the bank lobby did not dissipate, but rather thickened, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The hallway leading to the conference room was quiet, the only sound coming from their footsteps. Marcus could feel Caldwell watching him from the side, studying him the way a man of his stature always did. Assessing, calculating. Not in a demeaning way, but in a way that spoke of curiosity. Once inside the conference room, the door shut. Behind them, leaving Susan and the rest of the bank staff on the other side, the long mahogany table gleamed under the soft lighting, and the chairs were arranged neatly around it. Caldwell took his seat at the head of the table, while Marcus sat beside him. The others followed, and for a moment, there was silence. Not an uncomfortable one, but the kind that carried weight. Then Caldwell leaned back slightly in his chair, folding his hands together. "So," he said, his tone casual but with an edge of something deeper, "I imagine you've had quite the wait." Marcus exhaled slowly, a small, knowing smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Nothing I haven't dealt with before." Caldwell's expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in his eyes. He nodded slowly, as if filing that information away. "I see." One of the other board members, a woman with sharp features and an air of quiet authority, leaned forward slightly. "We weren't supposed to be here today," she said, her voice smooth but pointed. "But plans changed." She glanced at Caldwell. "And I'm starting to think it's a good thing they did." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He could sense what was unspoken in the room, the way they had all picked up on what had happened in that lobby, the way they were waiting to see how he would react. "I appreciate your time," Marcus said finally, keeping his tone even. "I know this meeting was scheduled in advance, but I suppose priorities can shift." Caldwell let out a small hum, tapping a single finger against the table. "Yes," he said, his voice carrying an almost amused edge. "It seems they can." Marcus didn't need to say more. He had already made his point. And from the look in Caldwell's eyes, he knew that the man had already drawn his own conclusions. The conversation shifted after that, moving into the actual purpose of the meeting. Financial discussions, investment strategies, long-term planning. Marcus spoke with precision, presenting his insights with the same confidence that had built his success. But through it all, he could still feel the undercurrent of something else in the room. A silent acknowledgement of what had just transpired, outside those doors. And as the meeting continued, one thing became increasingly clear: this was far from over. As the meeting progressed, Marcus kept his focus sharp, his words deliberate. The board members listened intently, nodding at the right moments, exchanging glances that spoke of interest. He knew his value in this room, his expertise, his experience. That was not the issue. The issue had been outside, in the lobby, where the real battle had taken place in silence, disguised as a mere inconvenience. Caldwell leaned forward, tapping a pen against the table as he considered Marcus's last point. "Your projections are solid," he said. "This strategy could be exactly what we need to maximize long-term growth." Marcus gave a small nod. "That is the goal. We have the data to back it up, and the market trends support the approach." The sharp-featured woman, Ms. Hendricks, steepled her fingers. "I assume you've already factored in potential regulatory changes?" "Of course," Marcus said smoothly. "That was one of my first considerations. The risk is minimal, and if we execute correctly, the returns will justify the approach." She gave an approving nod, her gaze lingering on him a moment longer. There was something about the way she watched him, not just evaluating his plan, but evaluating him. It was the same way Caldwell had looked at him earlier, the same way the others had shifted in their seats after witnessing what had happened outside. The meeting continued, filled with numbers, strategies, and discussions of the future. But under the surface, something else simmered. Marcus could feel it, the weight of unspoken thoughts pressing against the room. When the meeting finally wrapped up, Caldwell stood first, buttoning his jacket with a practiced ease. "Excellent work, Marcus," he said, his voice carrying more weight than just the words themselves. Marcus stood as well, shaking hands with each board member, exchanging polite nods and measured smiles. It was only when he turned toward the door that Caldwell's voice stopped him. "Walk with me." Marcus glanced at him before giving a small nod. Caldwell led the way, his stride steady, purposeful. As they left the conference room and moved back through the hallway, the quiet hum of the bank returned. Employees moved about, pretending not to notice the two men walking side by side. Susan was nowhere to be seen. Caldwell did not speak at first, and Marcus did not press. He knew when a man like Caldwell was choosing his words carefully. They passed by the main banking floor, where tellers greeted customers with their usual polished smiles. Everything seemed normal, almost too normal. Finally, as they neared the exit, Caldwell exhaled softly. "I assume this isn't the first time you've dealt with something like this." Marcus did not need to ask what he meant. "No," he said. "Simply." Caldwell nodded slowly. "It was handled poorly." Marcus let out a quiet, humorless chuckle. "That is one way to put it." They stopped near the entrance, just a few steps from where Marcus had been forced to wait for 2 hours. The same chair sat empty, a silent reminder of what had happened. Caldwell turned to face him fully. "You didn't say anything during the meeting," he noted. Marcus met his gaze evenly. "Would it have changed anything?" A pause. Then a small, knowing smile tugged at the corners of Caldwell's lips. Perhaps not. He studied Marcus for a moment before nodding to himself. "But it won't go unnoticed." Marcus did not reply. He did not need to. The message was clear enough. Caldwell extended his hand again. "We will be in touch soon." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "I look forward to it." As he stepped outside, the crisp air greeted him, cooling the heat that had been simmering beneath his calm exterior. He had expected a meeting today. He had expected discussions, negotiations, business. What he had not expected was the reminder of just how much still needed to change. And from the look in Caldwell's eyes, he was not the only one who had noticed.